Hey guys, this is the Casual Fan, and in this video, we will be rating the top 10 drivers for the 2023 Formula 1 season at the midway point. Now, what we have in front of us is we've done 12 races until now. We are in the summer break, so I thought it was a good time to just reflect on how the drivers have fared. Now, in this video, I'm not going to go through the entire 20 drivers. What I'm going to do is I'm going to share the list of the top 10 drivers at this stage of the season. Now, if there is anyone who's a repeated viewer, you've seen me do these driver ratings after almost every race. I've missed a couple, apologies for that, but more often than not I've been doing these videos primarily because I feel that is the best way to keep a track on how every driver is doing and how at every basic checkpoint at every race he has performed. Ultimately, you take the average of each and every race and you get a very good idea of how a driver has performed over a season. Now, in this video, we're going to do just that. So without further ado, let's get straight to it. And let's take a look at the top 10 drivers for the 2023 Formula 1 season at the midway mark. Now, first of all, at P10, we have YUKI TSUNODA. Now, looking at his season, as you can see the graph, there is something that is quite interesting. At the start of the season, he was being very consistent and performing at a very impressive level. Consistent P10s or P11s, he used to get that quite often. It has tapered off a bit. His drop in performance, to a certain extent, it has coincided with how the AlphaTauri has somewhat lost its competitiveness. However, overall, he still finds himself as one of the top 10 drivers on the Formula 1 grid at the midway part of the season. Now, talking about driver in P9, and in P9 we have NICO HULKENBERG. Now, talking about NICO HULKENBERG, one of the things that has stood out for him has been his very impressive qualifying performance. Now, almost everyone, now this is something that has been said quite often, the Haas is very impressive in qualifying and poor in races. Now, this should hold true if we take a look at NICO HULKENBERG because his performances have kind of resonated that perception. However, you don't see that with Kevin Magnussen. You don't see the consistent Q3 performances or Q3 appearances from Magnussen, on the other hand, while Hulkenberg has been consistent on that front. There have been a few races where he has been able to snatch a few points. I think one of the more impressive races was the sprint in Austria, which was quite clear that Hulkenberg did not have the pace to compete, yet he was still able to secure a point or two for the team. Other than that, even the race in Australia, where I think he secured P5 or something like that, that was his peak in terms of having a complete weekend where both qualifying and the race delivered. So yeah, overall he finds himself in P9 at the midway point of the season. Next up, albeit surprisingly, we have George Russell at P8. Now, many would have expected him to be a bit higher because, well, George is arguably one of the elite drivers in F1. However, that's not the case. The reason behind that is primarily because, well, he started the season well. He was very impressive in races like even Australia, where he qualified on the front row. He's had his podiums here and there as well. The problem with George has been the Monaco upgrade, and somehow something has not stuck. His performances have tapered off. He's made quite a few mistakes. The mistake in Monaco cost him a podium, where he went straight on the first lap on intermediates and let Ocon through. So yes, overall the season started well for Russell, but since the Monaco upgrade, something has gone missing, and the driver finds himself in P8 in the driver ratings at the midway point of the season. Next up in P7 we have Alex Albon, and in my view he has been very impressive in parts. The season in its entirety, while the thing is, what happens with Williams more often than not is whenever you get a good result, it gets highlighted a lot more. And when in a Williams you're not able to score points, sometimes it's almost expected. So every points finish or every good result is taken as a bonus. And that is something that has been happening with Albon as well, because there have been quite a few races where he has not really extracted the best possible result. Arguably, the race in Belgium is an example of that. Having said that, he has produced some very impressive races this season, and he has completely demolished Logan Sargent as well. And this is now two teammates in two seasons, which again shows and also headlines that the driver is doing something right in the team. In terms of his peaks, I feel the way he performed in Canada was very impressive. The call he made in qualifying, that was top notch, and even in the race he was able to do well. So that is there. Finally, I feel the crash in Australia, I think it haunts him a bit because he could have secured points for the team even in that race as well. So yeah, overall he finds himself in P7 at the mid-season driver ratings. In P6, now again this might come as a surprise, is Esteban Ocon. Now, he started the season somewhat consistently. He didn't have too many flashy performances, but more often than not, what you saw with Ocon was he was putting the Alpine in places it deserved to be in. I think the race in Monaco was his peak, arguably one of the best weekends for any driver this season. And since then, he has tapered off a little. The few races in Austria and even a few others, I've seen the performance take a bit of a dip. I think it has to coincide with the fact that McLaren has leapfrogged Alpine, and Alpine has been going through a rough patch. So yeah, at the midway stage of the season, he finds himself in P6 in the driver ratings. Now in P5, we have Charles Leclerc. Now in terms of the kind of season that he's had, it's been a bit up and down. There have been a few races that have been poor, to be honest, but then there have been others where he has done his bit. The race in Baku, I thought it was sensational and arguably one of the better weekends we've had this season. On the other hand, the race in Australia, it was shambolic. The crash in qualifying in Miami, it was poor. So yeah, more or less, it's a mixture of good and bad, and he finds himself in P5 in the driver ratings at the midway part of the season. Now in P3 tied, I have both Lando Norris and Lewis Hamilton. Now why it is tied? Because since I told you earlier, we do the driver ratings for every race, and both of them are tied on points. Now first of all, let's talk about Lewis Hamilton. Now talking about Lewis, I think it's been a very impressive season from his part, and since the Monaco upgrade, he has just taken off in a way. The way he has been able to pretty much demonstrate his superiority in Mercedes since that Monaco upgrade, especially, it has been very impressive to watch. There have been quite a few impressive races as well. His race in Australia, where he fended off Alonso for almost the entirety of the race, or even the race in Barcelona, where he was able to finish P2 coming through the field. There were some very impressive races. Yeah, there have been a few races where things have not gone his way. The race in Austria was probably one of the bigger example where, to be honest, he completely lost the plot. But yeah, overall, if we take a look at his season, it has been very impressive, and he is tied as the third best driver on the grid at the midway stage of the season. Well, at the start of the season, there were a few races where you could see that Norris was making uncharacteristic mistakes. The race in Saudi Arabia is probably one of them, where in qualifying he inadvertently made a mistake and pretty much ruined whatever was left of the weekend. Since that point, though, he has more or less bounced back. The driver is performing very well, to be fair, and some of the results, some of the drives that he's put together, they've made almost everyone stand up and take notice, because the way he fended off Lewis in Silverstone, the way he overtook Lewis again in Austria, where he continued to pressure him, and ultimately Lewis made a mistake and he went through. Even the race in Hungary, where he was able to first of all jump Lewis at the start with the overtake around the outside, and then ultimately have that kind of superiority over Oscar Piastri. That is actually something that is very impressive, and that is something that should hold him in good stead over the future battles where he might have to get his elbows out against a Max Verstappen or a Lewis Hamilton. So yeah, overall a very impressive season, and he finds himself in P3 in the mid-season driver ratings. Now in P2, we have Fernando Alonso. Now when we talk about Fernando Alonso, I think the start of the season was what took everyone by surprise, because Fernando Alonso was on the mark from the very beginning. The consistent run of podiums was very impressive, and arguably he was the only driver other than Max Verstappen who was pretty much driving flawless weekends. Since the race in Barcelona, where he had a poor weekend, the magic has somewhat disappeared alongside the drop in performance from Aston Martin. He had a good race in Canada, but then Austria, Silverstone, Hungary, even Belgium to an extent, they've not been his best weekends. He's done the good job. He's probably extracted the best that was possible from Aston Martin, especially if you compare it with how Lance Stroll has fared. It does appear that the driver has the magic is somewhat not there, and maybe he needs some boost from the car to get back to the level that he was performing earlier in the season. Having said that, he's still on aggregate the second best driver on the F1 grid at the midway part of the 2023 Formula 1 season. Now in P1, we have Max Verstappen, and I don't even think there's any surprise there, because the driver has been so impressive. He has been on the mark from the start of the season. The race in Bahrain was very impressive. It was interesting to see, however, how he tackled with the surprise pressure from Sergio Perez, because the races in Saudi Arabia where he lost and he was probably not 100% in terms of health, or even the race in Baku, where again I feel he kind of lost the plot and fought unnecessary battles and was too distracted and ultimately ended up losing to Perez. I think that was a time where one could have thought that there was some weakness that was there to be exposed. He has bounced back, however, and never lost since then. So yeah, in terms of driving, more or less it's been a perfect year for him, at least the first 12 races. There are few blips in Baku and Saudi Arabia. Other than that, pretty much flawless. And yeah, he is the best driver of the 2023 Formula 1 season at the midway mark. So yeah, these are the top 10 drivers at the midway part of the season. In terms of, well, questions of where an Oscar Piastri is, or a Carlos Sainz, or a Sergio Perez, well, here's the entire list of the ranking. You can take a look at it, and do let me know if you have any questions. I hope you guys liked the video. Do hit the like button, share it with your friends, press subscribe, and thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.